And welcome to my podcast. My name is Peter Doherty. I'm a Catholic priest and a psychologist who integrates my training in psychology and scripture studies to help understand the Gospels from a psychological perspective and thus seek out new pastoral teachings for Christians in these modern times. Today's podcast is from Mark chapter 4, verse 35 to 41. This Gospel will be read in churches on June the 23rd, 2024. Today's Gospel describes an experience Jesus had with his disciples on the water during a storm. Likely this story took place on the Sea of Galilee. The story is well known, especially during the early days of the church, as they were experiencing persecutions. The early church community was often in crisis as it dealt with factions from within and the persecutions from the Roman Empire. The people were often afraid and certainly asked themselves the question, where is God in all this? Why is Jesus silent in the midst of all this suffering? There were many martyrs who gave up their lives for their faith. Many early Christians wondered if they would be next. This gospel story likely serves as a sign of hope for the people who also felt they were on a boat during a storm with a boat that was ready to sink. It appears that Jesus was a heavy sleeper, and despite the tossing around of the boat in the storm, the disciples had to wake him. Their question to him, "Why do you not care?" probably sounds a bit harsh, but likely the people who experienced the persecutions likely wondered why God allowed the early church to experience these persecutions. As expected, Jesus calms the storm, but challenges the disciples for their apparent lack of faith. I'm not critical of the disciples. Fear is a powerful motivator. I am sure that the disciples, who were not fishermen and not used to being on a boat, must have been terrified. This story raises questions of the impact of fear in our lives. Fearing for their lives results in the disciples missing their greatest resource to resolve the issue, Jesus himself. All they had to do was wake him up, and Jesus miraculously calms the storm, and the day is saved. This story reminds us that God does offer us help when we are struggling or feel we are experiencing a crisis. The disciples first tried to resolve and rescue themselves, all by themselves, not realizing they had the answer in the person of Jesus with them. Asking for help is not a sign of weakness. This scriptural passage is powerful, as all of us have had storms in our lives. When we are confronted with problems that are a result of our own decisions, the actions of others, or other unforeseen circumstances, as we go through life, we need to deal with these ongoing hassles and struggles. We, like the early Christians during the persecutions, may have wondered why God allowed these situations to develop in our lives. I'm reminded of Matthew chapter 26, 36 to 46, also known as the agony in the garden, where Jesus goes to pray in the Garden of Gethsemane. This passage goes into more detail as we read Jesus praying that the cup that he must drink, the task he is asked to perform, may pass him by. Jesus understood suffering and understandably did not want to suffer. Despite his prayer requesting to be delivered from the task, he ends the words with, "Your will be done." Unlike the disciples in the storm, Jesus is not spared and embraces the crucifixion. Was Jesus' prayer a waste of time? I don't think so. He likely received strength, knowing that he was participating in God's plan, a plan beyond himself. Jesus had a sense of purpose and meaning, which can serve as a buffer against stress and depression. Having perspective and a purpose beyond ourselves helps us to persevere through the struggles. Working for a cause that is associated with positive emotions and psychological growth. You are not alone if you wonder where God is during your struggles. Religious scholars, mystics, and holy people have wondered about this purpose of suffering, assuming there is one. While many of our sufferings are a direct result of our own actions, many are not. Perhaps the losses we are experiencing are for the benefit of someone else. We are helping them. The suffering of the innocents doesn't make much sense to us. So I would suggest that our understanding of suffering is not complete, and we still need to grow in our understanding. I am sure most of us would like Jesus to remove the sources of struggle in our lives, like he did for the disciples in the boat. We may be reminded of the scripture passage from Matthew chapter 7, verse 7, "Ask and you shall receive." God knows what we need. Jesus is not giving us a blank check for favors. I don't believe that God creates struggles for us. However, when we are struggling, we have an opportunity to experience personal growth and psychological growth. I urge you to reflect on your skills and talents and ask yourself, while God is not removing the struggles, you have been given the tools to deal with those struggles. My question for you now is, would your struggles be more tolerable if you knew there was some ultimate benefit to yourself or to others? Going through our struggles might make more sense if we ask ourselves, what are we learning? What is the lesson to be learned from this struggle? Embracing our struggles can lead to strengthening and developing of our resilience. We are not defined by our struggles, but stand firm in the midst of our struggle. We learn problem-solving skills, our faith grows, and we gain valuable life experiences. I encourage you to reflect on the skills, talents, and abilities that have helped you in your life thus far. We also learn to be grateful for what we have. So while God does not remove our struggles, He does promise to help us manage the struggles we experience in our life. Thank you for listening. I invite you to join me next week when I examine the Gospel of Mark, who describes Jesus curing the woman with a hemorrhage and raising to life the daughter of Jairus. If this is the first time you've heard my podcasts and you're interested in hearing more, I urge you to listen to my podcasts listed on my website. Every Sunday, I release a new podcast focusing on the Gospel for the following week. I invite you to listen to all the podcasts, and I hope the reflections are useful to you. The link to the podcast is https://a_psychologist_looks_at_scripture.buzzsprout.com. The podcast is also available on YouTube. I'd like to thank my team, Heather Patel-Doherty and Richard Coulomb, who play an important part in the preparation for this podcast. If you have any questions or concerns, I can be reached by email at peter.doherty, DOHERTYOMI, @gmail.com. God bless and have a great week.